Michelle?
Absolutely. It is Tuesday, June 14th, 2022. It is now 12:01 p.m. and I will call the meeting into order.
Thank you. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes from the previous 2 meetings in May. Did the board have a chance to review the minutes? Are there any edits?
They look great. Very straightforward. I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you. So we'll move on to our financial statements here. I'm going to share my screen. So this is our bank reconciliation for May. We had quite a number of uncleared checks at the end of the month. And when I show you our balance sheet, that will give you a clearer picture of where we actually are. But provided that all of the checks that we had written in the last month cleared, that leaves us with $10,931 in the bank. We have, from like a cash flow perspective, we have spent, we will be reimbursed for expenses that we fronted the ADLM grant with the forthcoming enterprise wire transfer that should be arriving at some point this week. So if you look, when you look at our bills and you think, how are we going to do that? We will have the cash in hand by the end of this week. And Michelle might be able to give us a crisp answer on what exactly the dollar amount is of that check, because she managed the disbursement request. So that was our bank reconciliation, balanced our books. Yeah, as of May 31st, this was what our checks in hand, or our balance here, that's right. Nothing much has changed down here. Our profit and loss for May is basically the similar report as the bank reconciliation. We spent money, we didn't bring anything in. And this is just through the end of the year. So we've brought in $56,000 of grant income and income from our ongoing loan with Galvin, and have spent $112,000 mostly of grant funds. So those are our financial statements, and I'll show you that the invoices that we have in hand So the invoice for our audit, oh, I see, no, up top is an invoice for legal services through the end of April. I'm sure we'll have additional invoices coming in from Chris's office. This is the one that we have in hand. This is my invoice for this month. Then we have our annual insurance policy, which took some time to rustle up because the policy needed to be corrected. They were still insuring properties that were no longer on our logs. So that's our insurance bill. And then finally our audit bill came through for $11,500. So the board, you've had these since last week. Do you have any questions about any of these invoices or any of the financial statements? And I'm hoping, I'm wondering, is there a problem with us approving these expenses but waiting to cut the checks until our wire transfer comes through? Is there anything procedurally that's a problem there?
Who are you talking to, the board, or are you talking to Chris?
I guess both.
Chris?
Chris, do you know? Chris, you're muted.
So actually, before you incur expenses, before you sign contracts, you should be determining what the authorized amount of that contract is, and you should make sure that you have funds available to pay those expenses. In some cases, you can appropriate funds that have been unconditionally committed to a grant. So if that's what happened, you could potentially appropriate those funds for that purpose. But in this case, I take it you have some funds coming in that were a reimbursement from a prior expenditure.
Yeah.
You know, I think you're in a difficult situation because you certainly owe money to the people that you presumably, I mean, you have to review the expenditures, right, and determine that these are approvable expenditures, that they are consistent with the contractual obligations that you have, and then you would have to authorize those expenditures. But if you don't have cash to pay them at this point, then I'm not sure that you want to, you know, I'm not sure that you don't want to have another session to make sure that you have the funds to make these payments. I mean, this is a, you know, you're pretty close here, right? I mean,
That's right. We have a wire transfer that's on it's in process as of yesterday, right, Michelle?
Yeah. Sarah, what's the gap?
It's about, it's about the UHY bill alone is above what we have. So we could authorize those other expenses and hold on the UHY bill and authorize it. We could have a special.
Right. What's the discrepancy though between what you have and what you need?
We have we have $10,900 in available funds, and so the quick math, that makes it 12,800 plus, so 13,200, 13,300, so about $2,500.
Okay. The amount that needs to be reimbursed from ADLN to HCDPA is about 5,318.
That's right. And
so it's more than enough to cover that, but it's just a matter of it should be coming either the end of this week or early next week.
It's also within, that's the reimbursement amount, and then there's also the additional $6,000 disbursement for
yeah, so about over 11,000.
right.
So
I mean, I think at the end of the day, internal controls is up to the board, but you know, your legal authority to spend money is the money that you have and the money that you have to appropriate. So you can contractually obligate yourselves to spend money, but whether you should authorize your treasurer to write a check, to me, is a different issue if you don't have the money in your account.
Can we spend what we have and then come back when we get the rest of the money?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can spend what you have.
We could make two pay. Yeah, we can spend. The only issue is the UHY bill. We could pay that in 2 installments maybe, or we could just not cut that check until, Teresa can not sign that check until later.
Yeah, can we ask them how long we have before they tap on interest?
I don't think that that's a thing.
Okay, so yeah, let's wait. In other words, spend what we have to pay the little bills and then that big bill when we get the money. How is that? Can we do that, Chris?
Yes, but I think you probably ought to come back as a board and, you know, in a couple of weeks and do that again.
Okay.
You know, so that
Can we just table the financials until we receive the ADLN money and then have a special meeting? Sorry.
You mean table all the finances until we get all the money?
Right, because they said it would be here at the end of the week. So we can schedule a special meeting to come up after that, correct?
Okay.
Well, Ravonda, I don't know, you may want to, this is up to you, but you may want to pay your staff.
I
Yeah,
agree.
I was gonna say, let's pay the staff and then schedule a special meeting for the bigger expenses.
I
Okay.
second.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree also.
I'm not sure if that needed to be framed as a motion.
Oh,
So specifically, you're talking about my invoice and Chris's invoice, which is small. And
No, not mine. I'm not staff. I'm
Okay,
just a consultant.
I want to also advocate for paying our insurance bill, which is
Okay.
just $1,200. So we do have the cash in hand to pay our insurance bill.
I second.
So that's the motion, is to pay for my invoice and the insurance bill.
I second.
That works for me.
Okay.
I'll make the motion.
Oh, somebody make the.
I don't think anybody made a motion.
That's right. And Teresa has seconded.
Yes, I did. Sorry. I thought you were making the motion.
No, I can't do that. All in
Uh,
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Let's move on. So now we're on to old business. So the first order of business is the ADLN program update.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Hello, everybody. So the ADLN, we have a couple of programs. So the Housing Trust Fund, let's set that aside for a moment. We'll get to that at the end. We have a few other programs that are still running under ADLN. We're receiving that final disbursement of funds from Enterprise either this week or next week. So we should be finishing up all those items within the next month or so. So just to give you a rundown of what those final programs are, the first one that you all know about is the Hudson Roots rental assistance that we gave to Promise to disperse. So they, right now, since we've given them that disbursement, they have 8 families lined up to receive assistance. They're working with their situation and really hard right now to make that transaction. So we'll have the official reports next month, and they have more families lined up. We've also been working on more community engagement and education. So that's related to the Housing Trust Fund to get people's input, but also just related to increasing more awareness of different programs that he's working on, different issues around affordable housing and housing policies, and getting more input from people. So we're doing that in person. So we have about 4 or 5 pop-up events planned for the next month to reach out to people in person. And then also we have online engagement. So we have Instagram and Facebook account, and that has helped us already double our survey responses just within 1 week. So we're at about 100 responses right now, and a lot of them we've received really great and in depth. And it's also allowing me to understand, because there's places for people to provide more open-ended feedback, and it's helping me learn where some of people's concerns are or where some of people's misunderstandings are about housing, and so that's helping me kind of also frame and develop other sources of material to share with groups. So both those in-person events, trying to reach people who might not be on social media, and then in the online stuff is helping us expand our reach. That's what that Lazy Studio invoice, she's been helping with a lot of the design work and the analytics and algorithms and all that stuff that regarding social media that I am not well versed in. So she's been really awesome to work with.
You know, Michelle, I don't know if it's just me, but I could barely hear you.
Okay, let me turn my air conditioner off.
Oh, because you're going in and out, in and out, in and out. And I'm like, am I the only one?
No, choppy.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's cutting in.
It's choppy, yeah.
Okay, is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I think AC makes it hard to hear, and I'll speak closer. Do you want me to repeat anything I just said?
No, I think I got it. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Dominic.
Yeah, no, it seems like you start and then you fade out.
Yeah.
Oh, so just a brief summary. With the engagement, we have new social media accounts, and that's helped us double our survey responses in just 1 week, and help us engage with people directly. And then we have some in-person events planned to reach other populations. So both, seniors, for example, trying to work with some senior events, folks who might not be on social media, et cetera. And then the other thing I want to talk about is that the last component of the ADLN programs was hiring a housing strategy consultant. And so I just wanted to review what this means. So these funds are coming from the ADLN. They were directly allocated to hire consultants. And the thing is that it's to carry out the recommendations from the Affordable Housing Development Plan and the Strategic Housing Action Plan. And so we received, so I advertised the RFP on the city website, on the American Planning Association website, and with the New York Upstate Planners Association. And we received 8 responses, seven responses that were all really highly qualified firms. So I had like a scoring rubric to evaluate those firms, and the top 4 I'm going to interview with the mayor and Michael Hoffman to make sure we have a team that can complete the scope of work. So basically we're looking to, we have several things we're looking at in terms of tax abatement incentives, community land trust ideas, inclusionary zoning feasibility, things like that. And any of those projects alone, if you were going to hire a consultant, it'd cost about between $50,000 and $100,000 per item. But the thing about hiring me is that I can do most of the work, but I want to have someone to check my math, to get a second opinion, because people don't view these things in vacuums. And so this consultant is going to be someone to just kind of go through and be a second eye and review and bounce ideas off of, to make sure that things we're developing and policy ideas have been really well vetted. And so that if we come forward to the Common Council or the mayor's office with recommendations or ideas, that they have had a whole team of professionals who've looked at them first. So this is just part of the ADLN. And so we're going to go through that interview process in coming weeks, and then hopefully we can work out a contract and can present the invoice to you in July. And so I wanted to give you a heads up that it's coming your way. So you understand.
Michelle, before you go on with that, isn't the contract coming back to this board to be approved?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So not the invoice, but the contract.
Sorry, yes, contract. Yes.
Okay,
correct.
with a recommendation from the interview committee to the board.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so I know that you all want to, when you make a decision, you want to hear, I have all the information. So I can send to you, I don't want to do it on a public meeting because I haven't actually talked to the firms themselves yet, who's been selected and who hasn't, but I can send you after this, like the scoring rubric and just kind of a rundown of the firms, so you understand if you want to read more about my decision-making process and what that looks like. And then if there's any other information you'd like from me prior to that July meeting, just let me know so that we can go in and review that contract with all the information you need to be informed and prepared.
Michelle, would you talk to me offline about the form of the contract, please?
So,
As you know, we have a standard service contract form, so I prefer to use that if we can. It's more straightforward, right?
yes, thanks.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's it for me on ADLN updates. And if there's any questions from anyone. Okay, cool.
Michelle.
Thanks.
And then the next order of business is the Hudson Housing Fund updates, which will still be with Michelle.
All right. Mayor Johnson, do you want to talk about this?
Yes. So I met with Elena, who, as some of you know, works with the city on legal issues. So I've been working with Elena and with Chris to kind of iron out the housing trust fund after, Chris had alerted us, of some things that needed to be changed within the way we were ironing out kind of the trust fund. So basically, for this to work in a way that we've been kind of mapping it to work, we would need to issue some changes in our bylaws to basically give to create the advisory board, which is currently the Housing Trust Fund Board. We cannot create a subsidiary, so they can't organize as a separate entity that will kind of govern the Housing Trust Fund, but they can become an advisory board that we can give a specific criteria that we can create in our bylaws for them to do. But the ultimate decision will lie within this board. From what we learned, we are able to accept the funds. I think I talked about this with Elena and Chris. The safest bet is for us to establish a separate bank account. That way we can keep track of all the funds that we receive and how they go out in an organized manner.
But Mayor, you mean a separate bank account under HCDPA that would be
Under
under the
HCDPA.
treasurer's review, just like your other accounts are?
Correct.
Okay.
And did I miss anything, Chris? Or?
No.
Are there any questions from other committee members?
What? I'll say that again. What did you just say? What's happening here? I didn't get it. What? I'll just say what.
All right. So basically, if the committee, HCDPA, wants to take on the authority of the Housing Trust Fund, the ADLN grant, we would need to change our bylaws or update our bylaws to include an advisory committee. That advisory committee, which is currently the Housing Trust Fund Board, we can basically outline, what we would like them to do and accomplish. The ultimate decision, they would only be able to give us, to advise us, basically. The ultimate decision and votes on how money is allocated would rest with HCDPA. So they wouldn't have any voting power, but they would make the recommendations. For us to do this, and going off the advice of the attorney, the cleanest way would be to create a separate bank account under HCDPA, so that we can manage the finances in a clearer way.
Okay.
I'm curious, what are there any abilities to, or what are the limits on the kinds of powers we can specify for an advisory committee? Or can we set conditions that where the board, where the norm would be that the board would not overrule the advisory committee unless certain conditions were met, or something like that,
I don't know if that's possible, but I'll defer to Chris.
So I think it's going to depend on what your programmatic goals are. So what you might originally task the advisory board with is coming up with the specific recommendations for the initial priorities. As I understand it, based on the housing plan that you have had developed, as part of the ADLN. And then, let's say there's a first priority of X, and they want to recommend to the HCDPA that a certain amount of money be set aside for that program, whatever the program is. There are decisions that need to be made about expenditures for that program. I think it's going to depend on the parameters of the program. I think that short of creating a separate entity altogether and redirecting the grant funds directly from ADLN to that separate entity, If HCDPA is going to be the repository of the funds, then HCDPA has a fiduciary responsibility for the expenditure of the funds, right? So, but that doesn't mean that you can't, take the advice of and the expertise of a group that you have formed to do that.
Yeah, and I think that should be the long-term goal, is to look for somewhere else for the Housing Trust Fund to live. But in the meantime, I think that, we're more than capable of getting it started here at HCDPA and up and running.
And I think
So-
too, like the original vision, and that the like this advisory board would do the heavy lifting of really researching the priorities, and we're imagining getting these out as grants, and really doing the work of releasing the grant and interviewing the candidates, et cetera. That work would lie with the advisory board, and then we just have to kind of figure out the procedures of what you all would want in order to understand their thought process and how to be involved in a way that gives you the feel informed when you make decisions, but also don't bear the burden of doing the work, which is what this advisory board is signing up to do.
And presumably they'll have more targeted expertise to do.
Yeah. Any other questions from committee members?
No, I just want to say thank you to the mayor and Chris on working on this.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Michelle.
Intrepid.
So Chris, now do we need to make a motion to, I guess, create this bank account or accept the ADLN money?
Chris, you're muted.
You're mute. On mute.
Muted again. So you want to move to authorize the creation of a segregated account with a separate bank account to accept the Housing Trust Fund monies. That's for the purposes identified in the ALDN grant document.
Correct.
That was a theoretical motion.
Yeah. I like to make that motion. I don't know if I can repeat it back.
I will second that.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor?
I
Do we have any?
So I think
roll
the mayor suggested that the bylaw should be amended to actually set up a process for this to consider the expenditure of funds. So I had actually recommended, I'm actually recommending some other changes to the bylaws for other purposes, just to clean up some things and to create committees that are recommended by the ABO, which include a finance committee, a governance committee, and an audit committee. So certainly we could modify that version for your next meeting to include the ALDN, the HTF fund advisory committee as a part of that, so that you could consider approving the bylaws with those changes, and then it would allow you to have some time to look at those as well. Okay. The other thing, if I could, I also want to recommend to you that you adopt a couple of housekeeping resolutions. And again, we could schedule those for your next meeting and go through those, make sure that they are in proper order and include all the correct information probably with Sarah's help. But they include things like designating your official paper and designating your bank and things that you should just have in your minutes as a housekeeping matter on a formal, in a formal way at every At the beginning of every year, it should be done. And then I'm just suggesting that you do it now, just as a housekeeping matter. And then as part of the bylaws amendment, I'm also providing a more simplified version of rules of order for you to use that lays out, simple motion process, which does not require the use of Robert's rules. I generally do not recommend public boards use Robert's rules because it can be overly complex for the public to understand and for board members to use. So those are things I'm just recommending. You could schedule those for your next meeting if you want to.
I just have so I'd actually put on the agenda at Ravonda's request that we could look at those things later today for the last order of old business, because this has been something that we've been coming up with. So I'm just curious, like the motion that the mayor made was specifically about creating a segregated bank account, or was it?
Yes.
Do we now also need to make a motion? And so now, Chris, you're saying that the second motion that we would need to do to engage the Hudson Housing Fund is to amend the bylaws, but we can accomplish that at the next meeting.
Yeah, because I would like to try to, based on the mayor's input here, I would like to try to tailor the language in the draft bylaws to, incorporate the sense of what you were intending to accomplish with, to the extent that we can work that in to that section. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay. But a segregated bank account is something we should do
Prior to receiving funds.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So you're receiving funds, but you're not going to spend them.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So I didn't ask if there were any board members opposed to the motion to create a segregated bank account, or if there was any additional discussion. Okay. Sounds like a no. All right. So that's great. We've passed the motion to create a segregated bank account, and our next order of business was updates from the HHA.
Do we have to do a motion for what Chris just said to change the bylaws?
My suggestion, Teresa, is that you take that up at the next meeting so we have a chance to modify them.
Okay.
So in the meantime, we'll work on language and then send you a revised version that you could then vote on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yep.
And we can, just in case you, for redundancy and memory, when we come to that item on the agenda, I can show you we can look briefly at the things that Chris prepared.
Okay.
Okay, updates from the HHA.
Hello, everyone. Next Friday is Nick Zacco's last day with the Hudson Housing Authority as the interim executive director. Monday, June 27th will be Jeff Dotson's first day. We are very excited to have Jeff on the team. Pretty much that's pretty much the only updates we have for HHA. As we all know, we're singing the same tune about those properties for our RFQ, but a great update is we will have a full-time executive director in.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's great.
Congratulations.
Yeah, such a journey. All right. So then the next order of business is the HCDPA properties and the discussion about including them within an RFQ at HHA. And we discussed this briefly at our May regular meeting, and then again at the May special meeting, where we learned that there has been an updated timeline on what we had previously imagined in April and any time before about how long it would take to be involved in an RFQ, because there's been a sort of rallying of state and local authorities around who now recognize that the redevelopment of Bliss Towers is a major priority and a real necessity. And so I'm just offering this up top as a summary of where we've been. it's really, this is the board's opportunity to discuss the option to include some or all, to offer some or all of our properties for inclusion in an RFQ with HHA. And potentially, there's also an option HHA's at the last meeting discussed being amenable to alternate forms of partnerships. There are several ways we could pursue this. And this is our chance to talk about it.
Yeah, I think the conversation should start with, what property are we going to put on the market to sell? Since, we do need to have some money in the bank so that we can continue to pay our legal fees and keep operating. But I also am on the side of allowing the remaining properties to go into the RFP. But I'm only one member of the committee, so I'm also listening to everybody else's thoughts. But I do think that we need to have a focus on continuing moving this train.
I would only throw in there for the one property due to the housing authority wanting to include them all. I thought that the lawyers would be speaking together to see what would be needed to keep the lights on and the bills paid, maybe a payment, an upfront payment that the housing authority could give. I know there was a time that you guys wanted to sell the Columbia Street property. I believe that was like 19 grand or something like that. So still we want all of the properties included in our RFQ, and we want the lawyers to be able to discuss what the possibilities could be of either a down payment, something, so on and so forth, a number that HCDPA is expecting to receive, whether they sell a property or from HHA, the amount. Do we know an amount that needs to keep the lights on and the bills paid? Have we been able to figure that part out yet?
Sarah, do you know offhand, like an estimate?
I would say because an RFQ timeline could be as long as a year, I would say a safe number would be in the neighborhood of $25,000. Yeah, $25,000. That's basically our minimum annual overhead.
And we were earlier willing to sell a $19,000 property, correct?
Well, I think you're talking about 238 Columbia Street. Is that correct? The skinny lot sort of between two in the middle of the block on Columbia Street.
Yes.
And I don't think that, I think that there's been times where the board, has put that up. I think its current appraisal, its 2020 appraisal was $75,000. Of course, we're not obligated to sell things at market rate. Its assessed value was $14,000. So from a tax perspective. But yeah, its market rate value was $75,000. Would it be helpful to look at the properties that we're talking about again for the board, just to jog folks' memory?
I know them very well, but if anyone else wants to look at them, sure.
Okay, I saw, yeah.
I don't know, but I mean,
We're talking about a sliver of property in the center of the 200 block of Columbia Street on the north side, a property on the corner of Columbia and Second, where the community garden used to be, properties on Front and Warren Street on the north side, and then a sort of wooded parcel above where the Kite's Nest Garden site is, and I believe the Town and Country Warehouse, or there's on the corner of State and Front. So the topic might be, I'm hearing we could pursue selling 238 Columbia right away and potentially decide to include these 3 other properties in an RFQ.
No,
No, okay.
no, I don't want any of the properties sold. I would like to figure out the number, which you said was over 20 grand to keep the lights on. And I would like the lawyers to be able to negotiate how that can work,
Mm-hmm.
because they already spoke on options. And one of them was putting money down.
Right.
So it's already been spoken of. So I think we need to keep rolling down that road of how we can figure out how to include every single last property in our RFQ.
In other words, you're saying that, Rhonda, you're saying that you would like to figure out how can we bundle all the properties to put it into HHA's RFQ or something like that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and they would make an upfront payment, basically to continue the expenses that we have with HCDPA.
Okay, and with that, would you be looking at us selling them below market value? No.
I think, yes, that's has been what we've discussed in the past. That would be consistent with how we've discussed it in the past. That
How has it been done in the past, though, when you sold property? Was it below market, or what was?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say part of the way that I understand the sort of whole theory behind urban renewal is that it utilizes public dollars to, to make properties developable. And so the point was often, not to sell things at market rate, but to take on the cost of, for example, clearing a property so that a developer, could have a viable, that it could be financially feasible to build housing and replace the neighborhoods that were destroyed. So I don't.
So Teresa, that would be a yes, because they sold low market to Habitat for Humanity.
Right.
So that would be a yes.
Yeah. So yeah, from the beginning, it's part of our mission, I think, to certainly use below market rate prices as a tool in making developments happen.
Okay, so that's the way it has been. As the precedent of how we've been doing things.
I'd say yes. Yes. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of records of previous sales, especially in this specific context, which is like in the original urban renewal district, dealing with the first project that this agency ever organized, which was to construct Bliss Towers, or one of the first. So, we sold some properties up on Green Street that or even the Second Street sale, the properties we sold to HRCC. I don't know what those properties were assessed at, or when we sold the Pocketbook Factory, I don't know what those properties were assessed at. And then for a long time, this agency was combined with housing, but with both Housing Resources Columbia County, but also with HDC. So it's difficult for me to draw a specific in terms of I could do some research and look at it. We could look up a pattern, but I think the short answer is that we should anticipate selling below market, especially now.
Chris, is there a way that if we take a down payment and then have a structured payment, because it could take a while for, the RFQ or responses. So it could be a year or 2-year process. So if we take $20,000 now, but can we do a structured payment, and, after so many, certain time?
So I think that what the attorney for HHA was recommending, he had sent me a couple of sample MOUs that they had used in an Albany transaction, which really, they didn't have upfront payments, but that's not to say you couldn't work that in. But they were based on we'll just put it in the RFP, we'll see what flies, and then we'll figure out later, what the process for disposition is going to be. The language that they used in their agreements was pretty open-ended. It was, consents to the inclusion of the properties in the RFQ. And then upon, in this case, HHA's selection of the developer, convey the properties to HHA, subject to all approvals required by rules, regulations, and laws that govern the disposition of real property under terms and conditions to be mutually agreed upon at a later date. So the idea was that they were trying to put them in the RFP so that a developer could decide whether or not they wanted to include them in the developer's proposal to, the offering agency, in this case, HHA. And, because presumably how much was available and how much was needed is dependent on what kind of a proposal they end up getting. So these were very open-ended agreements.
So that means that they got paid after?
Yes, correct. So, that's not to say that you couldn't, as Ravonda is recommending, structure an agreement that provided for some kind of an upfront payment with, with the balance to be determined at a later date, right?
Right.
But in that situation, the finances for that other, could have been a totally different situation, right?
Right. I mean, these were,
they could be better set financially where that could be utilized.
right. Right. I mean, every situation is going to be different. They looked like somewhat similar in that it looked like they had a variety of parcels that they wanted to make available for a potential offer, right? But it wasn't like you had one site where you said, okay, this is what I'm trying to sell here. If it was more like this with a variety of potential sites for somebody to consider as a part of a process.
But I'm saying they could have been healthier financially to do something like that where they didn't need upfront money where.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
We're in a different situation.
Right.
Where
Right,
they work to mean
absolutely.
something, right?
Right, absolutely. Absolutely.
Am I right that is it this upfront payment would be more akin to an option payment than a down payment? I mean, the not because of the way the balance is applied, but because if it's an option to purchase essentially rather than like a.
Well, in the sense that you would be holding your property off the market for a certain period of time. Yes. Although typically when we structure an option, the person who holds the option has the right to acquire the property and the terms and conditions are, fair market value. Now, I suppose you could say, you could potentially, and it's something that I'd want to look at in terms of what that agreement should say if it's gonna have an upfront fee. But certainly you're not going to be able to have a fee that's refundable. If you get the funds, you're going to end up spending them, so you won't be able to return them.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's the condition under which holding the property off the market for a year would be the consideration that you're asking for funding for. And the question is whether HHA, I guess, Ravonda, is in a position to be able to fund that.
Which we've always been open for that option.
That's right. So what are our next steps here? Is it for the attorneys to?
Yeah, I would say next step should be for, I guess, the attorneys to speak, and I would recommend maybe getting us some options that we can look at as far as like what possible payments would look like.
And then schedule another meeting for this board to potentially approve an agreement.
And then we could look at the agreements as a committee and go from there. Because right now, it's just up in the air. We have something that we can actually read.
But what is it the sense of the board that you'd like the attorneys to work on a draft agreement that would be similar to this MOU where it's a fairly simple we're willing to make it part of the RFQ. We'll hold it open for X amount of time. And in exchange, we'll get a payment of whatever, whatever the number is, 25,000 or whatever you've decided that you want it to be. Maybe one payment or maybe multiple payments, but in exchange for doing that. But that means all of the properties that you're currently holding would be made a part of this agreement. Is that correct? That's what the sense of the board is?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Obviously, you can consider approval at the subsequent meeting, but I just want to make sure I know what we're looking to draft. Okay.
Yeah.
I would agree with all the properties
Okay.
Yeah.
being part of that.
Okay.
Any other thoughts? Dominic, anyone? All right. I guess that's the plan.
Is that something that you think will be ready in time to review next month?
Well, I think HHA's attorneys are anxious to get this moving, so I would think so.
So we can have a draft to look at and potentially approve next month.
Yes.
Okay.
At one time, Sarah, remember we said we were gonna look into the properties on Dock Street to see if they, why are they not buildable and how can they become buildable? But I guess we don't need that. We don't need to look into that anymore.
You're talking about the ones on State and Front, the ones that are
No, Dock Street, is it Dock Street
that's
near
right.
the water treatment plant, something like
I
that?
believe we
Yeah.
talked about the same thing. But there used to be a road that goes through there that has, unless you're talking about like over by Charles Williams Park, but we don't own those properties, so that would not be.
Okay.
But there are properties that they're basically of our four properties that there are two that seem pretty prime and ready to go, and there are two that one might potentially be too narrow, one might potentially have some like soil stability or contamination or grade issues, but the prevailing idea has always been to have the developers perform the due diligence around that and let them decide what's possible.
Yeah, I agree.
I guess one other question in terms of the structuring of this, the attorneys for HHA said that if this board wanted to be a partner in the development, they would be open to that, or if this board wanted to structure it as these other ones were, so that there was an expectation that the property would be conveyed to HHA for use in connection with the development, if that's the direction that they decided to go. If they decided to use these properties, then HCDPA would just dispose of the property as it would in one of its development agreements, but with HHA. Is that what you're assuming, that the properties will go to HHA and you would not continue to then have a involvement in the project? And I'm just laying that out there because they suggested that that was an option for you to consider. But it sounds like you're thinking about just disposing of the property, right?
That's how I remember us talking
Yeah.
about.
I would say yes.
We did briefly, inquire, like, is there a partnership that is, mutually beneficial, where that could get, some sort of long-term revenue strategy or something, but it wouldn't be, it's not I think we discussed that as not really a viable option.
Okay.
Okay, so our attorneys are going to work on drafting up that MOU. The final order of business was the board procedures, and Chris already gave us a little bit of an overview. Do we have any other discussion to make about those? Would you like to look at those amendments, or do you want to? I know, for example, the annual resolution, we'd probably want to wait until Ryan was present with us to assign committees and things. Currently, our committees have been comprised of the entire board, so we haven't really delegated in this way yet, but do we want to, Oh, and so with the bylaw amendment, is that sort of one motion that we'll make that will incorporate this rules of order draft, or can we approve the rules of order or any of these other things that you suggested?
So I would say we should do all of those at the next meeting when they've been on the public agenda and the board has a chance to review them. So
Okay.
this was just an opportunity to present them to the board for their consideration at the future meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And they've been in your inbox for some time, so we'll take the time to do that next month. Lastly, did we decide to schedule, we had briefly discussed scheduling a special meeting to approve this final invoice later in the month. Is this?
Yes,
Yes. I don't believe we made a motion.
we never, I thought we did make a motion in the beginning, but we can do it again. I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, when is that meeting?
Well, we'd have to email the board and coordinate our schedules.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So look out for an email for that from me. With that, we don't have any new business on the agenda, so we could move on to public comment.
If there's no public comment, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next month.
Everyone.
Goodbye.
Mhm.